Welcome to the 8th episode of the Filip The Terran Podcast, where I interviewed Ascanio Vitale, talking about the impact of fossil fuels and non-renewable sources of energy on the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Now, as probably a lot of you know, I am originally Polish, so the impact of the war in Eastern Europe has been pretty profound on me, on my day-to-day life, on what I look at when I open my phone, and what I spend a lot of time thinking about. So this interview with Ascanio, I think, really shed a lot of light on the important aspects that we need to keep in mind about this conflict. And Ascanio, someone who's very knowledgeable around these topics. He's a person with 2 engineering degrees, multiple successful businesses, a big NGO career also. I think had some very good feedback on the influence of energy in this conflict. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I think it's very insightful, and we'll definitely have Ascanio back on the podcast many more times in the future. So thanks for listening, and hope to see you soon. I'll let you start off. Tell us all about yourself. What do you do, and why did you come here to chat with me?
Sure. My story is a little bit complex, so I'll try to make it really short. I've got 2 degrees in engineering, and I've dedicated all my life to the environmental cause since I was a kid. And then I volunteered for many NGOs, environmental NGOs, mainly Greenpeace, in which I literally grown up inside the organization. I joined it when I was 15, and as soon as I got my second degree in 2001, I joined it professionally, and I became the energy and climate campaigner for them, for Greenpeace Italy. Then I worked as a climate campaigner for WWF Italy as well. I've been covering the position of European responsible for the renewable energy of WWF at Brussels. And then in 2006, I opened my own consultancy company. It's called Stop CO2, and we do improvement path on sustainability for companies as well as energy efficient buildings. In 2014, I also opened a spin-off called FlightZen, which developed an award-winning platform for the calculation of carbon footprint for the commercial aviation. And I've been sitting for 6 years on the board of a charity called Population Matters that deals with overpopulation and sustainability. So I've got a very wide and multidisciplinary approach on sustainability, as you can imagine.
Yes, that's amazing. So I have 2 questions, and they're very similar. First of all, why are you here with us today?
Well, we met, we had a chat, and I hope that I can discuss about interesting things for your followers, that we can touch topics on the environment, maybe not just with this podcast, but many others, and with an independent view, because I'm used to the ivory tower of Greenpeace and many other NGOs to analyze things independently, far from any political or commercial bound. So I love to keep my mind independent and to approach, to have a very upright approach on sustainability.
Amazing stuff. So, as I said, there's 2 of these questions. So, everything you described before, you clearly have a very accomplished career. I think it's a great idea to have such a vast engineering background. I think when you ever want to go after anything, I really think engineering is such a great thing to go to college for compared to many other things. But tell me, why? Why did you do this? Why did you join Greenpeace so quickly? Why did you pursue this career? Like, there's so many other things that you could do, which are probably much more conventional and easier. So what pushed you in this direction?
It's kind of a series of cofactors, because it's never one reason why you do something in your life. I mean, generally not something so profound. My choice started when I was a kid, because I started reading on science books about the demographic explosion and the situation about the planet and how we were. Actually, I mean, I was born in 1975, which was the beginning of a transition from the planet in actually regarding rich countries, industrialist countries, and I'm coming from Italy, which is one of them, where we sort of moved from a sustainable use of our resources to having an ecological footprint that goes far beyond the sustainability. And this is what we've been doing, and the impact has been growing so far at levels that industrialized country nowadays consume as much as 3 worlds if the whole planet used the same consumption model. Of course, it averages out with poor countries and developing countries. So the average right now, it's 1.7 planets, which is still an overshoot in around July, which means that we about 7 months every year we use the bioavailability of our planet, and the remaining 5 months we actually borrow from the future what we are using in terms of natural resources.
God damn. Well, that's
And this
a
is
heavy
why we
statement.
talk about sustainability. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. That's a really great way to phrase it. I think you should do a lot of work around. I don't know how, maybe you probably already do, but I think a lot of people should hear this, like exactly what you're saying, that we are like overusing our planet right now, and we still are increasing our population and naturally reducing the amount of energy that we get from fossil fuels. And yeah, so again, this actually ties us perfectly into our main topic, right? So, as I did in the introduction for all of you guys before this podcast started, we are today with Ascanio going to talk about the impact of fossil fuels and dependency on let's say non-sustainable finite energy and how that impacts global conflicts. This podcast is recorded during the time of the Russian-Ukrainian war. This is about day 9, I believe, either day 8 or 9, if you're watching this in the future. So can you explain to us, in your view, how much of an impact have had fossil fuels had on this conflict? And what is the information or the sources that you have to back this, right? I know a bit about it also, but I'm very interested in all that you have to say on it.
Sure. I mean, again, the reality is much more complex than it can be, summarized in 1 or 2 points. But my take on this war, on this sad war, is the same that I had on many other wars. I mean, there's an evaluation given by the United Nations Environmental Program, the UNEP, that states that historically about at least 40% of the wars that historically have happened around the world have been based on natural resources and mainly on fossil fuels supply. And I remember really well because I've been campaigning on that on the Iraqi war, not only the first one in 1990, but the second one in 2003, and then the war in Afghanistan as well. They have been covered by the excuse of many other reasons. And for example, one of them regarding the Ukraine war is the nostalgic aims of Putin of reestablishing the borders of the old USSR. But, and the NATO as well, the NATO expansion is one other co-factor, which is true in a sense, because we do have, wars that never start with the responsibility of one country. They always start with both sides' responsibilities. 99% of the times. And in this particular situation, Putin could have invaded Lithuania or Estonia or Latvia years ago when they joined the NATO, whereas Ukraine was still discussing whether to join it or not. So the actual truth that I take on this kind of invasion is that Ukraine is one of the richest countries of the old USSR that are not anymore part of Russia. Ukraine is actually the first country in Europe on the European territory that owns the highest amount of uranium. And Russia is still relying a lot on nuclear fuel, nuclear energy. There's a huge discussion about how nuclear energy is sustainable or not, and we can do another entire podcast out of it. But let's just bear in mind that when you need uranium, which uranium is a limited resource as well as fossil fuels, it's not a renewable one. So you need to find it, and Ukraine is the best and the closest place where Russia can actually supply it. As well titanium, as well as wheat and many other resources. And also it's, I believe it's the 10th in the world and the 4th in Europe regarding fossil fuels, oil and gas mainly, and coal as well, but mainly oil and gas. And let's not forget that since the fall of the USSR between 1988 and 1991, Russia has been facing a huge economical crisis, and its industrial system has never recovered fully. So right now, Russia is comparable to a gas pump for the rest of the world, for Asia and mainly for Europe. It exports around $160 billion of fossil resources. Mainly it's gas and oil. It's 100 billion more or less of gas and 60 billions in oil and a little bit of coal. So nowadays the economy in Russia holds on this kind of exchanges. And that's why as soon as Putin, I believe even before the real start of the war, Putin has been trading with Pakistan and China, new contracts for new gas ducts, new pipelines that to sell supplies to the Asian market and to increase the trading of gas within the Asian market in order to compensate whatever could have happened with Europe in case of the beginning of the war. And we don't have to forget that regardless of the sanction that we are applying right now as Europe towards Russia, we are still supplying them with around $100 billion a year in gas supplies. So 45% of the gas used in Europe, and I'm not talking about, I'm talking from London, I'm speaking from London, and UK has been moving away from Russian supplies. We are now dependent about 3% on Russian supplies, but there is still a lot of dependence on Russian capitals. For example, the new nuclear plant, Hinkley Point, the reactor C that is in construction in England, depends on about $2 billion of Russian money. And in Europe, Ireland, Greece, Italy, Spain, Germany are a lot depending on the Russian gas. So there's a sort of a strange relationship between a federation of countries that are declaring sanctions against a country, but at the same time that are financing a lot. I mean, the military expense of Russia is around $62 billion a year, which is less than a tenth of what the US spend. But in regarding the percentage of the total GDP, it's actually higher than the US. US spend around 3.2%. Russia spends about 3.9% in military expenses. And these military expenses are fully paid by Europe only in gas supplies. So Germany, for example, as soon as the war started, they started discussing about whether the Nord Stream 2, the pipeline that has been just finished a few years ago, has been completed. I believe it was 2016. I'm not sure. I've got the figure somewhere here, but in my notes. But it's been recently finished, and but the certification process has not been concluded. So the actual gas is not flowing in this pipeline. And Chancellor Scholz decided not to hold the certification process. So no gas is actually being bought through this pipeline, but through many other pipelines passing through Ukraine as well. Europe is buying a lot of gas. And in case Russia decides to close the tap and interrupt the gas supplies, this could become a huge crisis energy-wise for Europe. So right now we've been discussing in the past decade of how to move from fossil fuels to a total green transition towards a 2050 target of being completely energy, at least 80%. I mean, it's 100% electricity based on renewables, and around 80% of total primary energy transition towards renewable energies. So it's sort of a first step towards a complete energy independence and basing our supplies on renewables. And right now we are actually on the verge of a big decision. So we need to understand whether engaging in a war or whether spending money to actually accelerate this process and pointing towards a situation that can actually enable a discussion with Russia and the interruption of this war, rather than actually escalating it.
Wow. Well, that was so much
really complex.
Amazing information. That was actually really, really fantastic. So maybe just to add from the information that I have around this, and maybe you can give some feedback on it. So do you know much about like the oil fields apparently around Crimea within the Black Sea? So that's apparently, when Crimea was annexed, that was supposed to be, the real reason, for that to happen. So do you know much about, let's say, the Black Sea situation in terms of oil?
Yes, I don't honestly know the percentage of oil wells and gas wells that you can find in Crimea with respect to the rest of the Ukrainian territory. Honestly, I don't know the situation that much in detail. What I can tell you is that most of this oil field and gas field are one of the reasons why Russia has been aiming to Ukraine rather than invading other territory of the former USSR, as I said before. And taking into consideration that Russia is lagging towards the net zero transition, they're still depending a lot out of these resources. So it's not only just about ensuring a supply that can keep the Russian economy alive and trading these gas supplies towards the Asian market, is also about holding the energy system, the national energy system as well, which is still strongly dependent on gas and oil. So it's been the same reason why the US invaded Iraq and why Iraq invaded Kuwait. And as I told you, the reason of many other wars, the recent Libyan wars, for example, in North Africa by the US and France, that was also for ensuring gas supplies, because we, as Europe, we buy a lot from North Africa as well.
Wow. So it seems that well, I think what you said at the start, like nearly all conflicts on this planet are somehow related to energy. So do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with the estimate of UNEP, and actually I believe that they've been very conservative, because of course sometimes it's also a matter of politics on how much you can decide whether that war, the main reason was fossil fuel, or it was a political reason about the independence of a country or whatever other cofactors are insisting on it.
And you will never have, let's say, the full honest view of someone like Putin. Like it would be completely anti-strategic for him to be like, to come and tell us, exactly what he thinks, about this whole thing. Like, and we can't expect that of our leaders either. I don't think any leader in the world will tell anybody exactly 100% of everything that they're doing, because there's opposition. There's like they don't want the other nation to know, or maybe somebody inside the nation that would like be favorable with the other nation. So this is all like a strategic thing, and I think something I really want to touch on, because a lot of people, and on the subject of, let's say, misinformation, or people having views on one end and people having views on another end, and they all just read the narrative of one side. And I think there's a lot of people who just prefer to be the anti-mainstream narrative because it makes them feel good about themselves. There's a lot of those people, and I know some of them, and this is like they will shift immediately to the anti-mainstream. Now, what you were saying, I want to solve this problem, because this is a problem that they have, and this is a problem for the world, right? What you're describing, your views about this conflict are based on something that no side actually controls, which is how much oil is in which territory. How can we convince people to think like you? I would put myself in those people as well, because I also think this way. When I make a decision about something, I try to look at, like, rather than what this side and this side saying, just kind of have a good overview of, let's say, the geography and the economy and how it works, and understanding energy and how important that is for countries. How, in your opinion, do you think you can convince people to think like you're thinking right now?
Well, the official reason why Putin is saying that he's invading Ukraine is to free the former Russian territories that he claims to depend on, to belong to Russia, which in an historic sense they actually belong more to Turkey than to Russia, because Russia has been occupying them for 150 years and Turkey for 300 years. So it's quite a very complex situation when it comes for this kind of discussions. Israel as well, for example, Palestine and Israel. It's such a complicated thing, and I'm not a political expert, I'm not a war analyst, and I really want to point out that this is my personal opinion about it. So it's kind of a limited approach on someone who deals mainly with energy, and I know the repercussion of energy issues on wars. So again, it's just one of the many reasons. But if it were to be the only reason, or the main reason, that it doesn't explain why he's attacking from Belarus and from the northern side of Ukraine, and is moving toward Kiev and the western borders of Ukraine. He seems to be wanting invading the whole national country rather than just the Donbass and the other previous. Yes, exactly. So there's a news about this morning of the Zaporizhia. I might be butchering the name, which is the biggest nuclear plant in Europe, and it provides about 20% of the electricity in Ukraine only. The fact that it's pointing towards this kind of nuclear facilities is not just a tactic choice in order to interrupt the energy supplies and also, to control them in order to control the occupation of a country, but it's also, of course, to occupy a strategic place. It's not just a tactical thing, it's a strategic as well, because if he wants to bring Russia again to be an industrial power, not just an oil and gas suppliers for the rest of the world, he has to ensure more energy capacity. And what's better than invading a country that has them already at their disposal instead of investing and building new ones? Even more right now that newer technologies are in the nuclear field require tens of years before completing a plant. So it's much quicker to invade a country and to get its own energy supplies and readily available.
Yeah.
So
So now bring this very much down to, let's say, even the viewers, right? So anybody listening, how should we expect the current energy crisis with Russia to impact our lives? 'Cause I've already seen a bit of these impacts starting in Ireland for my brother recently. The prices of gas at the station went up by 20 cents, which is insane, when it, per liter, so it is crazy stuff. So can you tell me, what should people expect within the next weeks, within the next months, and then within the next years, if you want to project that far, but it's up to you.
Yes, there's the European marketing gas is mainly the main reference is the TTF, the future index of gas contracts in Amsterdam, as well as for oil is the Brent, for example. And the Brent has been overtaking the psychological figure of $100 per barrel, which it hasn't been doing for at least 4 or 5 years, if I remember well. So it's been a long time since it went beyond the $100 per barrel. The gas has been exchanged for $120 per metric cube, and that's a lot compared to what before was the level of gas. It's been almost tripling before in a few months. And that was just even before the war started, because it was just the tension building up at the Ukraine border that started signing contracts that were much more expensive than before on gas. So the gas supply and the gas prices, I don't think that they're going to go down very quickly in the next futures. Actually, I forecast a continuous increase of price as the war continues. And even if the worst ends very quickly, which I hope in absolute terms, I don't think that it will affect the cost of gas supplies in the short term. So we have to get ready of a future where gas is a source that we already know it's not sustainable and we had to get rid of it. But the plans and the speed by which we wanted to get rid of are definitely slower than the one that we should adopt. So right now, the first country who actually accelerated their transition towards getting rid of gas has been Germany. They said that they want to reach 100% renewable electricity by 2035. The previous target was 2040, and it was still a target that was much before the rest of the European countries. So all Europe is aiming to reach about 100% of renewable electricity in 2050, which compares to 80% of the reduction of carbon emissions. Don't forget that when we talk about electricity right now, we're talking about 25% of the total energy that we use in a country, because 75% is heat. And it's the energy used mainly in transport, in cars, in planes, in ships, as well as industrial processes to build cement and many other manufacturing processes. So in order to complete this transition, is not just about turning electricity into green energy, but is also about changing the way we actually produce and consume energy in our industrial system. So that's the main challenge, and it can be reached by accelerating the way we produce energy. Because if we start relying on renewable energies instead of oil and gas, And I would add nuclear energies as well for other reasons than the pure carbon emissions. But that, again, that's a topic for an entire other podcast. So it's
Yeah.
quite complicated to get into that. But if we do that with the surplus, we can actually start producing green hydrogen. And green hydrogen is one of the main sources that will help the total transition, where we can substitute the gas with hydrogen. So where the sector, the so-called hard to abate sectors, which is the steel industry, the cement industry, or aviation, for example, or even shipping, those industry will rely on combustion engines and endothermic engines and technologies and thermoelectric technologies. So they will need a direct substitution of gas and oil, and hydrogen is the best candidate to do that, with other biofuels and ammonia, but it's non-toxic, it's easy to produce and very clean to produce. Right now it's very expensive, so the problem is to actually engage the economy of scale of this kind of production system. But that can be only triggered by investing a lot in renewable energy. And so far, renewable energies have been growing, not in Italy. In the last 3 or 4 years, we actually been flattening out. But with the new Green Deal by the von der Leyen Commission president, we're actually aiming towards an acceleration on that, but we can do more. We can do 3 times as much as the actual plans are. To build a power plant, it takes 12 to 15 years. To build the same capacity with solar panels, energy storage, and wind energy, it takes less than 3 years. And if we did it with the right amount of investment, we can even reach 24 months to do exactly the same amount of energy produced with renewable energies. So the time has come to actually start a transition that can bring Europe, and I'm talking about the main energy consumer, which right now are Southern European countries, Germany and Ireland. Those countries need to switch to wind energy and to solar PV energy, which are the cheapest one right now at the moment among all energy sources. Even energy storage is becoming to be as cheap as gas and wind energy. So right now, the cost of PV plus 4 hours of storage is about $40 per megawatt hours. Wind energy ranges between $30 to $60 per megawatt hours, whether regarding the technology, whether it's onshore, offshore, floating, or fixed technologies. And so that there is a lot that we must do. And the main problems to face is not only the amount of money, private and public, that has to be invested, but it's also how we adapt to these new technologies. So it's about discussing with the community the occupation of soil of this kind of systems, because it's distributed energy production. So it's not anymore big, huge coal plant or nuclear plant placed somewhere away from urban centers, but it's production systems that get closer to the use points. So we're going to start seeing close to our urban centers wind energy systems, and in our cities, solar panels that can be distributed over, in the industrial warehouses as well as private residential houses. So this is a new way of conceiving how we produce energy, and it's a much more democratic one because everyone can produce it even at home.
Wow, you opened so many bubbles in my head. Like there's so many things to touch on and talk about. But I want to bring it back to the previous question just so we can close that, and then I want to talk about the decentralization of energy production, because that's a big one. So as you mentioned, you don't think so. As your standard person living in Ireland or England, anywhere in the UK or France, Germany, let's say in the EU, right? With the current conflict going on, do you predict, like, what's your prediction if you were to tell these people what can they expect in terms of how much of a impact on their life cutting out from Russia will have? So if you were to just give them, like, okay, what can they expect, just to close this?
Yeah, well, regarding the war, there's nothing that we can do on the short term energy wise, because this transition, as I told you, can be accelerated as much as reducing by half our dependence to Russian gas in 6 to 12 months. And therefore, within 2 or 3 years, we might be able to, if we do things really well, we might be able to reduce to almost nothing our dependence to Russian gas. There is also dependent on oil. Germany, for example, imports 98% of the oil they consume. So there's a lot that has to be done. So on the short term, the only solution for the war, for the tension on the eastern side of Europe, can be solved only diplomatically and by understanding the reason of both sides and starting to actually sit down. I mean, wars can be only fought. There's nothing in history that teaches us that wars have been solving the tensions between the conflicts between two countries. Wars have been fought, and then diplomacy has been taken off, and finally finding solutions and writing treaties. So what we have to do is learning from our past mistakes for once, show that humanity can actually learn from past mistakes and get over the war and start discussing diplomatically since the beginning the reasons of both sides. So Europe should play a major role out of it, because we've got the responsibility of being part. And I mean, Ukraine is even asking now to join the European Union. So it's bringing on the discussion on over all the other member states. So we must take a stand. We must do a diplomatic effort to stop this war. We haven't been doing much when the tension was rising. So we need to do it now, and we need to do it not only for the Ukrainian people.
If I was to say, and maybe some people will have some kind of reaction to this, but I want to say it. I think a good idea would be to split Ukraine potentially, I think like Luhansk, Donetsk, right? I think that the really Russian influence east of Ukraine could potentially be given to Russia, and then the West automatically in the EU, automatically within NATO, just to have some kind of agreement. That's just an idea, just to put out there. Maybe some people will think about it, probably won't get anywhere. But I think, again, I'm not saying this is perfect in any way. I'm just giving my view, right? But anyway, so
it's a difficult topic. I mean, if I think about Israel and Palestine, for example, I believe that the best solution would have been there, for example, to have a sort of an international control on the hot places like Jerusalem.
Exactly.
Instead of giving it to one side of the other one, just putting international community getting over them.
Exactly what I think.
That could happen in a sense. I mean, in the completely different context, but it could happen in Ukraine, because splitting between Russia and Ukraine wouldn't solve the situation. Actually, the bombing has been going on since 2014 after the second Minsk agreement. So war has never stopped in some areas of Ukraine. So splitting it into parts, I don't think will actually end the bombing and actually the violence. What we should do is actually having someone else, a third party, getting part of the discussion and the control of the area, which is quite a very complex political thing to face, because
who's even going to be this third party?
Sovereignty.
Like everyone's already taken a side. like who are you going to get to be the standard? Like who's neutral here? Like at the end of the day, U.S. and NATO and the West has so many allies, and Russia has so many allies, right? Like China is kind of seems to be more Russia than the West, but not really that far, So it's very hard to pick a country that could be here in the middle. But anyway, that's a whole nother tangent. We could have a whole topic just about our opinions on the war. But going back to what I was asking, I want to ask a financial question, right? So do your day-to-day Europeans, how much will we pay for, and by the way, this is not important to me, I don't even drive a car, so I'm not being like, oh, how much am I going to lose in the Ukraine-Russia war? Not at all. And I hope to lose as much as I have to in order to stop it. But how much can we expect, let's say, the impact of how much it costs to fuel your house, electricity, of how much it costs to fuel your car, if you have a nice car, ICE, so internal combustion engine, not nice. So what do you expect? So you said it will take about 12 months to get off this, right? So within this year, what can we expect?
Yeah, 12 months to get rid of half of the dependence on Russian gas. To get rid completely of fossil fuel dependency will take a little bit more. But yeah, what we can expect for sure is that it's already happening. I mean, in Italy, for example, but it's happening all over Europe. And as I told you, it's actually a generalized thing happening all over the world, even in the US. Investing in wind energy in Texas, for example, has a 12% return on investment. So it's one of the best way of investing money. The International Energy Agency, before this actually the Ukraine war, stated that 96% of the total capacity of energy plants that will be installed all over the world in the next 5 years is going to be renewable, because renewable energy is the cheapest way of producing energy. So as we move towards renewable energy production, the cost of electricity is going to get lower. Nowadays in Italy, and again, it's more or less the average that what's happening in Europe. The cost of renewable energy is about 3 times cheaper than fossil fuel and the average mix of the nation. So when companies sell energy to the state, they actually sell it to the price of the average cost of energy, and they give back to the government about 2/3 of what they're getting, because the real price of their energy is 3 times less. It's 2/3 smaller. So what we can expect is that the price of electricity is going to get lower, while the price of gas is going to increase. And this is a message for everyone who's thinking about retrofitting his house, buying a car, or even improving the energy bill of their company. They must move towards the electrification of their systems. So in a house, for example, it's getting rid of a gas boiler and installing a heat pump. It's installing PV panels on the roof with a battery, so that you actually are investing a little bit of money at the beginning. And I know that it's difficult in absence of any incentive by the government, but it's when you invest in renewable energy, it's about buying the energy supply for your next 30 years at the discounted price altogether. So you're spending a lot of money at the beginning, but you're actually investing in halving your energy bill and ensuring your supply of electricity, even if the grid doesn't supply you with the electricity. Climate change is actually affecting energy production in some states, in Europe a little bit less, but more in the United States and in Africa and Asia. Sometimes, but even in Italy, it has happened when drought, for example, they take out the water supply for agriculture and for fresh water to drink. They take out water also for the power plants, for thermoelectric power plants, or for hydroelectric power plants. For example, Italy relies a lot on the glacier on the Alps. And as they're retreating, there's less water to make the hydroelectric plants work. So the production is decreasing. And sometimes during the summer, we can have blackouts. If you get electricity from a PV panel and a battery, you don't even have to care about blackouts. Apart from the cost of electricity, you've got a reliable supply of electricity in your house. So it's about changing your gas hobs into induction cookers. And these induction cookers actually save you money. They save you about 1/3 of what you pay in terms of gas to cook in your house. So there's a lot of small transitions to be made. Electric cars, they cost about 2 to 2.5 times a gas car, but the investment is paid back in function of how many kilometers a year you do. But in an average consumption of a city car with a few holidays from time to time out of the urban center, you pay back your electric car in around 4 or 5 years. So it's something that, of course, right now it can be done by middle class or upper middle class, and whoever has a low wage, it becomes more difficult to be done on a short term. But that's where the government has to, publish the right policy of incentive and make it possible for everyone to do it.
Okay, so you brought up an awesome idea. Tell me, I'll ask you live on air. Would you like, we can do it every month or every 2 months, we could have a really deep engineering discussion on this podcast to understand a lot of these problems. You know why? Because there's so much nonsense out there, right? And it's very hard to verify for someone who is not an engineer. For example, you started talking about electric cars, right? And now there's this whole misinformation counterculture like movement somehow. I think people just want to disagree and somehow blame the government for being some kind of evil conspiracy on how basically lithium ion batteries make the whole electric car less renewable than an ICE car. I don't believe this myself, but this is like I don't feel like I'm skilled enough or knowledgeable enough to counter this properly. So I think it'd be amazing that we, I'll bring up these things which I think, like potential nonsense, and then we can talk about here for an hour, and we could potentially solve it. So first of all, are you open to doing this?
Sure, I'll be happy to. And talking about electric cars, it's a huge topic. Again, it's quite difficult to put everything right now because people are going to start bleeding by their ears if we talk about all things at the same time. But yeah, there are actually interesting and independent studies that show that electric cars are actually more sustainable than gas cars. Of course, let's postpone the discussion in depth from another time. But just very quickly, let's keep in mind that we shouldn't think about doing a transition for the 2.2 billion vehicles that are around the world from gas-powered gasoline to electric engines, because that's unsustainable. While we do the transition, we have to change our consumption paradigms. And you are younger than me, and maybe a lot of people that are listening right now to this podcast, they will have to live in a world where the car is not anymore a product, but it becomes a service. So you don't actually own anymore a car, apart from a certain category of people, like, people who work with the car on a daily basis, like doctors going to their patients or, delivery companies and so on. But the average car is parked 95% of the time. You park it down your house, then you move to the office or to your workplace, and then you park it again, and then you use it only a few times every day. But it's 5% of the time that it's been used. So if you think about a self-driving car, for example, as the technology will be introduced, it will become very easy not to own a car, but just to summon it with your smartphone,
Tesla,
or with your watch,
robotaxi,
or with your wearable, and you don't even have to worry about the parking. So that's the new way of actually changing, using one car instead of 15 on the road, if you use it as a service instead of a product.
I could talk about an hour about a ton. Like, I'm a big fan of Tesla and Tesla investor, and I'm a big, I'm very, very bullish on all the things that you're talking about. And by the way, I know conspiracy theories against them. So for another time, that's for another time, right? But so slowly running out of battery on the iPad, unfortunately. But I would like to, while we still have a moment, I want to ask one very important question about everything you've talked about so far. So you seem like it's either the people in government are just not as smart as you are, or there's something holding them back. Like, they probably have advisors similarly, like, have similar knowledge to you, right? They're probably not as good as engineering as you. But what is holding them back from making these decisions? I have a lot of theories, but I want to hear your view on it.
That's the $1 million question, and I've been asked this question all my life, and the answer has always been the same. And I've been experiencing in first person. I mean, I've been witnessing with my own eyes. When you go to the European Commission, when you have to deal with the national government, I dealt with the Italian government mainly, and I've seen what is the difference between being part of an environmental lobby, which is mainly NGOs and laboratories and independent centers that publish reports, and they have to bring them to a politician to be read. And generally, the amount of money that is available to these organizations is less than a tenth or even 100th of what the oil and gas industry has at its disposal. So when we actually focus on the report, we devote all our money towards having an independent and report full of facts. But then between that and convincing a politician, there's a huge ocean in between, because you have to make it appealing. You have to do an executive summary, because politicians never read the whole report that you bring them, because it's a technical report. So you need to produce the material. You need to be present all the time. And this is a cost in terms of time and resource that not all organizations have. Instead, the oil and gas industry, for example, at the COP26, the biggest delegation at all, in the absolute way, regardless whether it was a government or an organization, the biggest lobby group present at the COP26, which is the yearly, the COP is the yearly meeting of all the countries in the world. I'm talking about international geopolitics on climate change. It was belonging to the oil and gas industry. So what
I
do
was
you
about to
expect
say
when
it.
you've got so when a politician receives a laminated report with a lot of gadgets and promises that you're going to get a lot of votes if you follow me because I represent thousands of workers, we have billions of dollars of profit every year, these kind of things, mainly politicians are not that smart sometimes, or they're not that educated. They haven't got the background to actually weigh the two sources, or which is the most independent and most reliable. They see what is fancier. They see whoever is more present and convince them continuously, insisting that this is the right choice. So regardless whether it's a legal thing or illegal, because sometimes there are illegal practices that oil and gas industry have been taking in the past, and they have been demonstrated publicly. I'm not talking about conspiracy theories. So there,
Yes.
and there's a licit and an illicit way of pushing on a politician, but the result is that the amount of firepower of the oil and gas industry is much higher than, hey, we are a strobe again. It's much higher than the renewable and the environmental organizations.
You're so right. I mean, like, this is lobbying and short-term thinking on the micro level, and not making it in the macro level because it's a politician making the decision. It's a whole nother podcast that we can talk about. I think perfect timing with this slide. I have 1% of iPad as battery as well. So let's end it here. It's been an absolute pleasure, really. And I hope to have you here multiple times. We can discuss the frequency, but it's been very valuable for me. I'll probably watch this on my own after, just to learn from all that you said again. And then we'll go from there. But I'm gonna have to cut it now because this might die and might get deleted. Okay.
No problem. Likewise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Been a pleasure.
Thank
Ciao,
you.
ciao.
Goodbye.